আজি কিমান হ'ব লেকচাৰ লিখিছানে কোনোবা লেকচাৰ 4 Bryophytes. So let's start the class. In the last class, we have completed talking about the first group of plants, that is algae, and what we remember is the chief characteristics of algae, the classification, the life cycle, the reproduction, etc., etc. So today we will be talking about the next group of plants, that is bryophytes. Before writing the notes, what are the points of bryophytes that you have to know, and what is that or what is the portion that is asked in the examination? From bryophyte section, the examples of bryophytes, right? Next is ecological importance of bryophytes, economic importance of bryophytes. Next is when we talk about bryophytes, the examples will equal the highest, or one example of a higher bryophyte, one example of a lower bryophyte, right? So hekini points, and as a whole bryophyte buli kole certain points about the entire group. Now whenever we are talking about about plants in plant kingdom, generally we start with one particular word, that is either a sporophyte or a gametophyte, right? So whenever we have talked about algae also, we have used something for the plant body. Similarly in case of bryophytes also, if we are going to start the first line about bryophytes, we will have to talk about the plant body. So the plant body of bryophyte would either be called as a gametophyte or it would be called as a sporophyte. Similarly in case of pteridophytes also, or in case of gymnosperms, or in case of angiosperms, we will be starting with the first line, that is about the plant body. So plant body discuss korute hoday duta word ahe, eta hol gametophyte, eta hol sporophyte. Now what is the basic difference between a sporophyte and a gametophyte? What we understand by the word sporophyte and the word gametophyte? Gametophyte means phyte is a plant, right? Gamete bearing plant, that is called as a gametophyte. Spore bearing plant, that is called as a sporophyte, right? Next, another point of difference between sporophyte and a gametophyte, we have to talk in terms of the number of chromosomes that is present inside the cell. If n number of chromosomes are present, then the cell would be called as a gametophyte. If twice n is present, it is called as a sporophyte. So there are certain differences. Again, we have to talk in terms of reproduction also, that is also different in case of gametophyte and sporophyte. But basically, if you look into a particular plant, how will you identify whether that's a gametophyte or it is a sporophyte? Morphologically, if you see it under the microscope, if you see or if you start studying about the chromosome number, then it's obvious that we'll come to know about it as a sporophyte or a gametophyte, right? But if suppose we are talking about it looking into the plant morphologically, then how will you identify whether that plant is a bryophyte, whether that plant is a sporophyte or the plant is a gametophyte? Can I get him? Microscope or all sare to ami gomei pam. Any ami keneke gom pam? Kundal plant, sporophyte, kundal plant. Actually, there is nothing called as a scientific explanation for that, but just simply what we can understand, if in a plant we see proper roots, stems and leaves, then that type of a plant would be considered as a sporophyte. If suppose we see a plant where it has leaf-like structures, root-like structures and stem-like structures, generally we use the word gametophyte. Not a very scientific definition, but this is something that we remember. For example, if we talk about a gymnosperm maybe, or we talk about an angiosperm, we see proper roots, stems and leaves. So this is one characteristic which will define them as a sporophyte. This is just a way to identify. Okay. Next, starting about this topic, bryophytes are what is the first word that we start the note with is obviously the plant body. The plant body of bryophyte ki hoy? Gametophyte, right? If it is gametophyte, the ploidy of the cells, it is N. Next, they are also called as, do you remember we have talked something called as archegoniates? Algae আমি যেটা sex reproductive বা sexual reproductive structures of কথা কৈ আছিলো, we know that we are talking about the male reproductive organ and the female reproductive organ. Either we talk about Antheridium or we talk about Archegonia. In case of algae, Antheridium present ne absent? In case of algae, Antheridium present ne absent? Present. In case of algae, Archegonium present ne absent? Okay, first of what is Antheridium, what is Archegonium? Antheridium is a male sex organ, Archegonium is a female sex organ in case of plants, right? But if you are talking about primitive plants, or especially if you are talking about algae, tahator ki nathake, they don't have the Archegonia, but they have the Antheridium. Instead of Archegonium, the female reproductive structure could be called as Carpogonia, it could be called as Oogonium, etc., etc. So in case of Bryophytes, the first word that we use is they are the first Archegoniads. So whenever we use this word, what we understand that this is the group where Archegonia has just started developing, right? As we go from Bryophytes onwards, in the next group of plant, that is Pteridophytes, Archegonia would be present or absent, it will be present. Similarly, in case of Gymnosperms also, Archegonia present or absent, it would be present. But in case of Angiosperms, again Archegonia would be absent. So this presence and absence of Archegonia in the different groups of plants will talk about the evolution factor also. Right. So gradually Archegonia or the development of Archegonia talks about evolution. Primitive plants of Archegonia absent. As the plants evolved, starting from Bryophytes onwards, Archegonia started developing, but gradually it started declining, and finally in case of Angiosperms, it is totally absent. So Archegonia quote ase quote nai hetu bostu ami sabo lagibo. Next is another word called as amphibians. Bryophytes are also called as amphibians of the plant kingdom. So amphibian boli kole what we understand? Amphibian, both, right? So both boli kole, in case of Bryophytes, we understand that there are certain examples that are aquatic in nature and there are certain examples that are terrestrial in nature. So they are called as amphibians, they are called as the first Archegoniads. The next word is they are also called as first embryophytes. Phytes, again the meaning of phytes ki hoy? Plant. Embryophytes means what? Embryo bearing plant, right? Another point to be remembered is in case of algae, embryo present ne absent? It is absent, right? Now the question is, when will an embryo develop in a plant? Under what condition will embryo develop in a plant? We know in case of Angiosperms, embryo ase. In case of Pteridophytes, also embryo ase. In case of Gymnosperms, also embryo is present, but in case of algae, the embryo is absent. So what is the reason that embryo is absent in case of algae? Or the question could be put in another way as, what is the factor or what is the condition due to which the embryo gets developed? To give that answer, first you have to know who forms the embryo. Embryo kune form kore? Okay, first what is the embryo? Embryo ase ne nai pisot discuss korim, kinte embryo ki hoy? You have heard about the word embryo, yes or no? So what is the embryo? Okay, embryo develops into what? Embryo pra ki develop kore? Embryo pra baby plant develop kore, right? Where will you find the embryo? Obviously inside a seed, right? Generally if you are talking in terms of Angiosperms, we see seed formation. Inside the seed ki thakiba embryo, from the embryo the baby plant will develop. The question is, who forms the embryo? First point, embryo is a product of sexual reproduction. If we talk about sexual reproduction, what we understand? Fusion of gametes, right? N into N will give you a cell that is twice N, and that cell is called as what? Yeah, it is called as zygote, right? Zygote, what happens to the zygote after fertilization? Zygote or jodi meiosis hoy, tetihale zygote ki form koribo? Are you understanding what I am saying? So embryo is a product of sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction hobo lagile ki lagibo? Duta gamete lagibo. Duta gamete fuse kori pelai ki form koribo? Twice N ok ami ki boli kom? Zygote. Zygote ki form kore? Zygote forms embryo. Embryo ultimately develops into the baby plant. Is this clear? Right? Now the point is, zygote or ploidy kiman? Twice N. What is the ploidy of the embryo? right? So, the ploidy of the embryo is twice n. If the ploidy of the embryo is twice n, two things that we can understand from this. First, who forms the embryo? The zygote forms the embryo. Second, by which cell division? Meiosis. No, meiosis. You are asking me or you are saying me the answer? Or you are confirming yourself? At least you are trying. What about the rest of the students? Zygote forms embryo. How does it form? By the process of cell division. Cell division we know divided into two types, either it's mitosis or it's meiosis. So, which type of cell division would be responsible for the formation of, it will be mitosis, right? So, if the zygote undergoes mitosis, ki form koribo, zygote ki hoy, it is nothing but one single cell. If that cell undergoes mitosis, what it will produce? Daughter cells, right? How many daughter cells? Mitosis ek eta division of keta daughter cell form kore? Tuta. Meiosis ek keta produce kore? Sarita, right? So, ultimately what happens is the zygote will keep on dividing and then it will form two cells will divide and again it will form four cells, and as a result a collection of cells would be formed, and that collection of cells is called as ki? Embryo. Is the point clear? Right? What is embryo? A product of sexual reproduction. Who forms embryo? It is the zygote that forms the embryo. Zygote undergoes dash to form embryo, zygote undergoes mitosis to form embryo, right? If the zygote undergoes mitosis, only then the embryo would be formed. Now, can you give me the answer why in case of algae we do not see the embryo? Very good. Remember haplontic, diplontic life cycle we have drawn. Protistot ami akisilu, right? So, embryo first point, it is always twice n or it is always diploid, right? In case of algae, if you talk about algae, suppose the plant body ki hoy? Haploid. Haploid ki form kore? Gametes, right? Both the gametes will fuse and then they will form what? Zygote. This zygote undergoes what, and what will happen to this zygote? Zygote embryo form koribo ne zygote ako mother plant ba baby plant form koribo? Etue ki hobo? This one, if suppose now the zygote will decide if it undergoes mitosis or whether it will undergo meiosis, right? Mitosis hobo ba meiosis hobo. Ultimately, what is the function of the zygote? To produce a baby plant. And if you are talking about the baby plant should be exactly the same as the mother plant, right? If the zygote undergoes mitosis over here, tetyahole ki form koribo? Twice n. Twice n cannot be the offspring of n. N or offspring hobo paribo niki twice n? Who would be the offspring of n? N would be a offspring of n. Twice n would be a offspring of twice n. So, in case of algae, the zygote instead of mitosis, it undergoes what? Meiosis. Right? So, why is it that in algae we do not see the embryo? The reason is the zygote does not undergo mitosis. It undergoes meiosis directly. That is the reason why embryo is not formed. In other way around, if the embryo has to be formed, then the zygote should undergo mitosis. Right? And the zygote undergoing mitosis could be seen only starting from bryophytes onwards. Right? So, bryophytes onwards, bryophytes, pteridophytes, gymnosperms and angiosperms, in all these four groups of plants, ami ki dekha pao, the zygote undergoes mitosis. But it is only in the group called as algae where the zygote directly undergoes meiosis, and so the embryo is not formed. A plant with an embryo, obviously it is called as an embryophyte. In which group of plant you can see the development of the embryo? It starts with bryophyte, and that is the reason why it is called as the first embryophytes. So, starting with bryophytes introduction part, there are certain words to be remembered. First, amphibians of the plant kingdom. Second, they are the first archegonians. Third, they are the first embryophytes. Clear? Next, together with these words, we will also be using a word called as sciophyte. What is a sciophyte? As far as plants are concerned, they could be broadly divided under two categories, that is, one is heliophyte and the other is sciophyte, depending on whether they require sunlight or not. Sunlight to require, obviously they will require for the process of photosynthesis, not in terms of preparing food, in terms of their habitat. There are certain plants that survive under high sunlight, there are certain plants that survive in shade conditions, right. So those plants which survive in shady conditions, those are called as sciophyte. Bryophyte is an example of a sciophyte, right. So, words kita clear hole, amphibians clear hole, Archegonia clear hole, Bryophyte clear hole, sciophyte clear hole, right. So, Bryophytes or habitat, if you talk about, they grow well. Bryophyte are the example, question. Give me one example of a Bryophyte. The most common example, moss. Where will you find moss? Have you seen moss? Moss dekhisa? Kot grow kore? Birat rodot grow kore niki? It's always in a damp, cool, shady area where you find the mosses, right. So, characteristic of a Bryophyte regarding its habitat, a group of plant that grows in cool, damp, shady area, and this type of a plant is called as sciophyte. Clear? Okay. Next is, as we have already said, that they are also considered as amphibians of the plant kingdom. So, amphibians means what? They will be found in water and obviously in the soil also, or in terrestrial area. Now, if a plant grows in a terrestrial area, they will have to absorb water, yes or no, right. So, as far as absorbing water is concerned, generally if we talk about Angiosperms or Gymnosperms, tahate water absorb kihore kore? The tissue that is responsible for absorbing water obviously is a xylem. Xylem falls under what? Vascular tissues, right. So, another point about vascular tissues you have to know. As far as vascular tissues are concerned, vascular tissues started developing first in the first land plants. If you talk about first land plants, which group of plants are we referring to? It is always the pteridophytes. So, vascular tissues co develop kore, it is only in the group called as pteridophyte where the vascular tissues started developing. So, what about Bryophytes? Do they have vascular tissues or they do not have? They do not have vascular tissues, right. If they do not have vascular tissues, then how do they absorb water? They absorb water through the entire body surface, or they absorb water through the parenchyma cells, right. As the plants gets evolved, higher plants bilakor ki thake well developed vascular tissues thake, right. So, it is the highest plant will have the most advanced vascular tissues. And if you are talking about the highest plant, we are referring to what? Angiosperms. Lower to Angiosperms ki thakibo? Gymnosperms. So, in case of Gymnosperms also you will see the presence of vascular bundles, but it will be not as evolved as in case of Angiosperms. Kiba eta tissue out of the 4 tissues of xylem and 4 tissues of phloem would be absent in case of Gymnosperms and also in case of pteridophytes, right. So, coming back to Bryophytes, what we have discussed, talking about vascular bundles, it is absent. Absorption keneke hoy? Parenchyma cells ere. Next, so Bryophytes are also, they are not considered as evolved land plants. No doubt we have said that they are amphibians of the plant kingdom. So, there are certain examples that grow on land also, but in spite of that we cannot be saying this group to be evolved land plants. If you have to use the word evolved land plants, then it should have all the vascular tissues properly developed, right. Successful hobo lagile, adult plant successful hobo lagile, successful in terms of what? Successful in terms of evolution, right. Adult plant talk ami successful ketia kom when it is found almost in all weather conditions, almost in all areas. For example, if you talk about Angiosperms, Angiosperms bilakor proper habitat na thake, right. In any type of a weather condition you will find the this one Angiosperms. But if you are talking about Bryophytes, as we have started with the first line, they always require specific condition. Thanda hobo lagibo, shady hobo lagibo, water thakibo lagibo. So, if these are the criteria, these criteria always speak about what? Primitive nature of a plant. If a plant can survive without much of the criteria, then obviously it will be considered as an evolved plant, right. So, Angiosperms evolved puli kom ami karon criteria by requirements kom, right. Another point is the requirement of water for the point of fertilization. In case of lower plants, if fertilization has to occur, they are always water dependent. If there is water, then only fertilization will take place. That is another condition. If there is a condition, the plant is called as what? Primitive. Angiosperms or conditions nalage, they don't require water. In case of Angiosperms, the male gamete does not have to swim in water to reach the female gamete. But in case of lower plants, if the male gamete have to swim in water to reach the female plant, that characteristic is a characteristic of a lower plant because they are water dependent. Clear? So Bryophytes are ki hoy lower plant, Bryophytes or male gamete ki hobo, they will be always water dependent. If there is water, only then fertilization will take place. If fertilization takes place, then only the cycle takes place, right? Okay. Next point is something called as alternation of generation. Plant kingdom porhile ami alternation of generation we have to talk about. What is alternation of generation? If we see the presence of two generation, which two generation are we talking about? The gametophytic generation and the sporophytic generation, right? So in case starting from Bryophytes onwards, ami alternation of generation dekha pam. Tar mane in a particular life cycle, we will see the gametophytic phase, we will also see the sporophytic phase in one particular life cycle, right? So if the plant body of Bryophyte is a gametophyte, তাহাঁতৰ লাইফ সাইকেলটো কি হ'ব লাগিছিলে gametophytic life cycle হ'ব লাগিছিল কিন্তু in spite of that we see a certain phase that is sporophyte also. So alternation of generation is seen in Bryophytes, Pteridophytes, Gymnosperms and Angiosperms, right? Talking about alternation of generation, plant body is a gametophyte only in case of Bryophyte. Baki bilakot Bryophytes onwards jiman bilak plants ase starting from Pteridophytes, sobore plant body ki hoy sporophyte. If the plant body is sporophyte, maximum phase sporophytic hobo, eta phase ki hobo gametophytic hobo. In case of Bryophytes, what will happen? The maximum phase is gametophytic, one phase would be sporophytic. Clear? So alternation of generation is seen. Next point is, if you see two generations in one particular life cycle in a particular plant, then you have to know the relation between the two phases. What is the relation of the gametophyte with the sporophyte or vice versa? Sporophyte or gametophyte or relation ki? We hear certain words like the sporophyte is totally dependent on the gametophyte. The sporophyte is partially dependent on the gametophyte. The sporophyte is totally independent. These are certain sentences that we will study during plant kingdom. In case of why we'll have to talk about these sentences? Because alternation of generation is something that's seen from Bryophytes onwards. দুটা phase থাকিব. So দুইটা phase or to কিবা এটা relation or থাকিব লাগিব no, all of a sudden they cannot be totally different or totally I mean দুটা life cycle to নহয় no, এটাই life cycle হয়. So in case of Bryophyte, first point, the plant body is a gametophyte. Sporophytic phase present or absent? It is present. Third point, if sporophytic phase is present, is the sporophyte dependent on the gametophyte or independent of the gametophyte? It is purely dependent on the gametophyte. What we understand by the word dependent on the gametophyte? First, what is gametophyte? A plant bearing gametes. What is sporophyte? A plant bearing spores or producing spores. Plant body of Bryophyte ki hoy? Gametophyte. It will produce gametes. Gametes will fuse. Ultimately, they will form a structure. That structure would be called as the sporophyte. Aru etal horu plant produce koribo. Hey plant dalok ami ki boli kom? Sporophyte. Now the next point is, where will the sporophyte grow? Main plant body to ki asile Bryophyte. Tahate ki produce korile sporophyte. Sporophyte to kot grow koribo. Similarly, in case of Pteridophytes also, the plant body, the main plant body is called as a sporophyte. What they will develop? They will develop a gametophyte. The question is, where will the gametophyte grow? Either it will grow on the plant itself or it will grow in the soil. Are you understanding? So this is the point of comparison that we have to do. Etia to hame eta class ke porhim no, we'll be studying with Bryophytes first, then we'll go to Pteridophytes and then one by one. But while you are studying the plant kingdom as a whole, the way to study is you have to make a comparison. Comparison keneke koriba? The vascular bundle, suppose that's a point you take. Present ne absent, Bryophytes are present, Pteridophytes are present, Angiosperms are present. You make a chart for that. Next is alternation of generation, present ne absent, code present. That is second point. Alternation, third point is the plant body. If it is sporophyte, it will produce gametophyte. If it's gametophyte, it will produce sporophyte. Fourth point, if it is a gametophyte, if it produces a sporophyte, where will the sporophyte grow? If the plant body is a sporophyte, if it produces gametophyte, where will the gametophyte grow? Right? So enuka points bilak ami compare korim. As we go on in the chapter, it will become easy. Right? So this was something about Bryophytes, and finally what we have is examples of Bryophytes. And the most common example that the question is always asked about is sphagnum. Right? Sphagnum is an example of a moss. Sphagnum or report a maximum question ahe. It is also considered as a absorbent cotton. Sphagnum, no? Kyoh karone cotton boli koy? Because it has a water retaining capacity, right? So during older days, no, generally World War homoy jeta cotton discover kora hua nasile, ei wounds bilak dhakibole ki korisile? Sphagnum di dhaki disile, right? Next is sphagnum is also used for the transport of living tissues from one place to another, because it helps in carrying the or retaining the moisture of the tissue during this transfer. So sphagnum to important or baki teneke iman important nohoy, right? So this is the thing that we are going to discuss. So we'll start writing the notes. Bryophytes boli likhi first likhasun, the term bryophyte was given by So after the points that we have written, eta word monot rakhiba. Next yate the word mats or carpets, right? The group of plants that forms carpets, right? Any word that you did not understand, please ask. Sciophytes mane shade loving plants are called as sciophytes. Sun loving plants are called as heliophytes, right? So sciophyte or heliophyte, HELIOPHYTE, sun loving heliophyte, shade loving sciophyte. Question could be asked from this point also. Roots present absent, absent, instead of roots keep present, rhizoid. Give an example of a plant that has unicellular rhizoid, give an example of a plant that has a multicellular rhizoid. In case of lower bryophytes, they have what? Unicellular, Rixia, Markensia, Anthoceros, these are considered as lower bryophytes, right? Moss is the example of the most highest bryophyte, most of it multicellular. Is this part over? So, যোনকেইটা টিক কৰিছো সেইকেইটা ভালকে চাবা দেই। So the main plant body would be called as a gametophyte. On the gametophyte itself, you will see the development of the sex organs, right? Because we know bryophyte or ki hoise algae pora evolve hoise. The second point is sexual reproduction present or absent in case of bryophytes. It is present because we have already read the group of plants or the group from where sexual reproduction has evolved. Kunto group of pora asile protist, right? Protist or pora first sexual reproduction evolved hoise. Now from so protist onwards, all the groups will show what? Sexual reproduction. So after protist, what we have discussed? Fungi, right? Sexual reproduction present. After fungi ki discuss kori, so algae sexual reproduction present. So in case of bryophytes also, obviously sexual reproduction would be present. If you are talking about sexual reproduction, sex organs or male sex organ and female sex organ needs to be formed. Gametes thakibo lagibo, he gametes bilak kot form koribo inside the sex organs. So the point is, in case of bryophytes also, male gamete and female gamete are formed. Where they are formed? Inside male sex organ and female sex organ. Where are the male sex organ and female sex organ formed? On the gametophyte itself, right? Main plant body to thakibo, right? Next, as I said, the entire chapter you have to study by comparing, right? Etia ami individual pori asu, but after the completion of the chapter, you have to compare algae with bryophytes, bryophytes with pteridophytes, pteridophytes with gymnosperms. This is the way you will study. So one point of comparison is about this one. We have talked about algae prior to bryophytes. We have talked about the sex organs also in case of algae. Sex organs present in algae, sex organs also present in bryophytes. One point of comparison. In case of algae, sex organs, at a point ki, Archegonium absent, bryophytes or Archegonium present, Entridium present in both. Next, in case of algae, sex organs are unicellular and multicellular, unicellular, jacketed and non-jacketed, non-jacketed, with one exception. The exception was Cara. But in case of bryophytes, what we have seen? Multicellular and jacketed. So what is the point? What you can do is, A2 point, Itia now you will remember. Once you complete your plant kingdom, we go to the next chapter. There is a tendency that you might forget. There is a chance that you might forget. So what you do is, yar sidote algae buli likhi pelai, sex organ buli likhi pelai, ki likhiba? Unicellular, non-jacketed. So the next time you study bryophytes, this point also comes to your brain, right? So eneke comparison point bila, comparative points bila likhi loba, right? And when you write this, exception buli likhiba, Kara. Are you understanding? So keep a space, or maybe you can, after you go home, what you can do, stick a page on that also. Sticky note ata logai diba. Right? Tetiale ki hobo comparative ekhon nije nije bonua jabo. You don't have to sit down to make a comparison in for extra time. Right? As you read, you can make a comparison. Right? Okay. So these points are understood. Out of these, I think you have heard something called as Gamecup. Gamecup ba gamma cup, plural and singular, right? So this is one very important question ahead. Reproduction with the help of Gamecup is a characteristic of which group of plants? Bryophytes. And you have to be specific with the example of bryophyte where you see the Gamecup. Ko dekha pua? Markensia, right? Markensia related, another question that is asked is about the two diagrams that is given in your NCERT book. If you have noticed the diagram, there are two words, Entridiophore and Archegoniophore. Right? So diagram to ta didibo, you have to identify which one is a male Markensia, which one is a female Markensia, right? One that has Entridiophore. Entridiophore means what? Phore means it's a stalk, right? Entridio has come from the word entridium. So obviously it's related with what? The male plant or the male sex organ. So the plant having the Entridiophore is obviously the male Markensia, and having the Archegoniophore is the female Markensia. The question that is asked is diagrammatic based question. Diagram aaki dibo, you have to identify which one is Entridiophore, which one is Archegoniophore. Have you seen the diagram in your NCERT book? Yes. Dekhisane? If you see, or anyone who has the diagram in front of you, just see out of the Entridium and Archegonium, no? Ki thakibo sosan? Eta enuka thakibo, edal stalk. This is the phore, right? So here what you will see, either you will see a diagram like this, or what you will see? You will see a diagram where something that's beautiful, something that's not beautiful. So obviously beautiful ki hobo. So it will be, that was very sexist, okay? Anyway, that is the way you remember. Diagram to very clear ase, that is Archegoniophore. Very clear no, that's Entridiophore, okay? Okay, so this is done. So up till here what we have studied is, we have talked about the plant body of Bryophytes, and the main plant body is nothing but a Gametophyte. Gametophyte tut ki thakibo? Sex organs kita thakibo. Can I have this? Nai hua.
Hello.
Androcyte mother cell. June male gamete to form koribo no, male gamete has different names. In case of Angiosperms, the male gamete is inside the pollen grain no, so ami tat male gamete to nokoi pele pollen grain nu koi thoi diu. Yate ki hobo male gametes aru eta naam ase enterozoid. Enterozoid june produce kore he cell bilakor eta naam androcyte mother cell. Okay, likhilwa and then we'll say how we'll study. Ventral canal cell, VCC. Neck or tolot venter. The swollen portion is the venter, neck. Etu neck, etu venter. Tapsot? Etu. Venter to duta cell thakibo, eta ventral canal cell, eta egg cell. Right? And egg cover cells. So we are peeping through the one. Which one? This one. Ventral canal cell, VCC. Neck canal cell, NCC. Over. Draw the diagram, comma shift. Finished? Online students, is it over? Okay. Now what is important? The word gametophyte. We understood. What is the gametophyte? The main plant is called as a gametophyte. In the gametophyte, what you are going to see? The sex organs. What is the name of the sex organ? Entridium and Archegonium. What is the structure of the entridium? Round or globular. I don't think we have to write it down by the diagram itself, we can identify, right? But in case of Archegonia, we have to know this word flask shaped, right? Next, in case of entridium, what we have said is the sex organs in case of Bryophyte is multicellular and jacketed. So it represents a multicellular structure. It has an outer layer of cells that is called as the jacket, and so we have drawn the jacket. Inside the jacket, what we have? Group of cells, and these group of cells are called as androcyte mother cell. From the androcyte mother cells, the male gamete would be formed. Now the point is, first, what is the ploidy of androcyte mother cell? Okay, what is the ploidy of the male gamete? N. Male gamete kune form korise? Androcyte mother cell. Androcyte mother cell kot ase? Archegonium, sorry, entridium. Entridium kot ase? Gametophyte. What is the ploidy of the gametophyte? Haploid. So all these structures would be what? haploid itself, because it's still in the main plant itself, right? So if suppose yate jodi questions ahe, then each and everything would be N. Anthrozoid, male gamete, everything would be N. First is the ploidy. Second, jacket present ne absent, it is present. Third is motile and non-motile, obviously motile, right? Fourth point, the shape. Because we have to, after Bryophytes, we will be studying about Pteridophytes. As I have already said, we have to make a comparison. In case of Pteridophytes also, male gametes are present. In case of Bryophytes also, the male gametes are present, but both the shapes are different. So question I had, comma shaped male gamete is a characteristic of, spiral shaped male gamete is a characteristic of. So comma shaped is something that you have to underline and you have to remember. Next, again that's important is biflagellate, because we will see certain examples of male gamete in certain groups of plants which are uniflagellate also, right? So question I, uniflagellate male gamete is a characteristic of, biflagellate male gamete is a characteristic of. So these are the words that you need to understand and remember, comma shaped, biflagellate. So these are the points from this side. From here, when we talk about Archegonia, it is a flush-shaped structure. It is made up of two parts. The neck, that is the tapering end, it's called as the neck, and the swollen portion is called as the venter. In the neck, we see certain cells which are called as neck canal cells, and in the venter, two specific cells, ventral canal cell and egg cell. Out of all the cells in this structure, from fertilization point of view, which cell is most important? Obviously the egg cell is important. So when fertilization has to come into effect, then what will happen? These cells will gradually disappear. What will happen? We will be talking about it later. As of now, this is the structure. Next, you have to take notice to this word, neck canal cells. Neck canal cells code ase Archegonium, Archegonium code ase Bryophytes. Second point, again for comparison point of view, in case of Pteridophyte, is Archegonia present? Yes. In case of Pteridophyte, what is the structure of Archegonia? Archegonia is always a flush-shaped structure. So in Pteridophytes also, it will be a flush-shaped, but it will be inverted. So if it is Archegonia, then these are the cells that will always be present. Neck canal cells, duitate thakibo, ventral canal cells and egg cell, both in case of Bryophytes, both in case of Pteridophytes. But the point of importance is the number of neck canal cells in Bryophytes and the number of neck canal cells in Pteridophytes. What you need to remember is, as we talk about evolution, what happens? No doubt Archegonia started developing in the group called as Bryophytes, but gradually it disappeared also. That is the reason why in case of Angiosperms, we do not see Archegonia. Angiosperms or Archegonia, male sex organ, female sex organ, Angiosperm or present or absent? Obviously present. Male sex organ in case of Angiosperm is called as K. Pollen grain, inside the pollen grain you have the male gamete. Female sex organ in case of Angiosperm is called K. Ovary, inside the ovary you have the ovule, ovular bhitor ki thakibo, egg thakibo, so you can say either this or that, right? So what we have said is Archegonia started developing in Bryophytes, but gradually it declined also, or it vanished also. So while we are talking about disappearing of a structure, all of a sudden the entire structure cannot disappear. It is gradual disappearance, gradual loss of cells that will occur. So what will happen is, in case of Bryophytes, ami ki dekha pao, neck canal cells or number to hodai besi dekha pao, as compared to the neck canal cells of Pteridophytes. So in Pteridophytes, when we will study, we will see that the number is confined to just one neck canal cell. So question that is asked is, presence of one neck canal cell is a characteristic of, or presence of 6 to 10, 6 to 4 more neck canal cells is a characteristic of. It's a characteristic of Bryophytes. Declining of numbers, declining of cells, reducing of cells, obviously it talks about what? Evolution. I think I have already said, any characters that reduces talks about what? Evolution. Remember the thing that we have talked about, two cotyledons and single cotyledon. Which one is advanced? Obviously single cotyledon or unicotyledon is advanced. Similarly in this case, more neck canal cells and less neck canal cells could advance hobo. Less neck canal cells, so more neck canal cells ko ase. Bryophytes or less neck canal cells ko thakibo. Pteridophytes are in this one, in case of Gymnosperms, almost absent. Okay, we'll be starting about that. So ki monot rakhiba this point, either specific 6 to 10, according to some books it's 6 to 14, according to some books it's 6 to 4, etc. The word that you need to remember is many. Question study from comparison point of view, the question directly would be asked is, NCC is equal to 1 is a characteristic of dash group of plants, Pteridophytes. Clear? So that's the way we will study. Okay, now, ekhin loke ami ki poriso? If suppose example of a bryophyte যদি কওঁ, some of the examples that we have written, no? Primitive bryophytes and advanced bryophyte, Rixia, Markensia, Anthoceros, right? Moss, these are examples of bryophytes. If you talk about Rixia or if you talk about Markensia, suppose we are talking about Rixia, no? How does Rixia look like? Something like this. Right? Markensia kole something like this. Right? The main plant body. So, etu ki hoy? Gametophyte. Etu ki hoy? Gametophyte. The entire plant body is called as gametophyte. Sex organ, Antheridium, Archegonium, born on the gametophyte. Sex organ, Antheridium, Archegonium, born on the gametophyte. Male gamete present here, female gamete present here. Similarly, in this case, male gamete present here, female gamete present here. The next point of discussion is about fertilization. If you are talking about sexual reproduction, if you are talking about fertilization, then obviously the male gamete and the female gamete needs to come and fuse. The point is how they will fuse. Yar bhitor male gamete ase, yate female gamete ase, male gamete kole jabo lagibo, have to reach the egg. The point is how will they reach? We have already discussed one sentence saying that male gametes in case of lower plants are always water dependent. Right? So, water lagibo, tetiahe male gamete to ki hobo female to le jabo. Male gamete to female to le jabo lagile, they have to come out from the structure, yes or no? Because this structure is formed something inside here. No doubt we are drawing a diagram like this. That does not mean it has come out. No? A gutebor male gametes could form kore ase inside the antheridium. So, as the antheridium matures, what happens? It leads to the bursting of the antheridium and the anthrozoids, all the male gametes are liberated in the water. Because bryophytes are lower plants, maximum of the bryophytes ki hoy water habitated grow kore, right? Or in places near to water bodies. So, suppose we are talking about this as a plant dadal ase, ekinte pani ase. So, plant dalot yate male sex organ ase, yate female sex organ ase. It is not like that through the plant itself they will go and fertilize. Teneka nohoy. Ki hobo? Male sex organs to burst kori, the male gamete will come in the water. From the water, it will again reach this and then it will go inside the archegonium. No doubt both the structures are present inside the plant body itself, but it is not like this that they will jump koribo nware. Right? So, ki hobo lagibo? Antheridium to phatibo lagibo. Antheridium phatar pisot male gametes kita ulabo lagibo. Where they will come out, they will get liberated in water. It is with the water that they will enter inside the archegonia. Is the point clear? Right. Next, coming to archegonia, no, we have seen something called as cover cells in the archegonia structure. So, cover cells obviously will cover the entire structure. So, what happens? The same explanation, when archegonia gets matured, right, what happens is certain types of, it starts secreting certain types of mucilage inside the archegonia and it starts absorbing the water that is outside. Right? Karon ami jano plant dal kot hoise, water body usorte to hoise. So, archegonia when it gets matured, it starts absorbing water. This water, what they will do is break down these cells, right? And ultimately, they will produce a gel-like or mucilage-like substance inside this flask-shaped structure. Once it is filled with mucilage, it will exert a pressure and ultimately it will open the cover cells. Once the archegonia matures, it starts absorbing water. The water with the inside contents mixes up, forms mucilage, contents increases, gives a pressure, cover cells disappear. Clear? Next, when this water or inside contents it mix over, it forms what? Mucilage. This mucilage will come and mix with the surrounding water. Surrounding water ki asile? Already male gamete kita asile. So, we will be using something called as chemotaxis. Have you heard the word called as chemotaxis? Chemical attraction. Right? So, we have said that the male gamete needs to swim towards the female gamete. Where is the female gamete? Inside the archegonia. Now, the point is, how will the male gamete know where exactly the female gamete is? Janibo to lagibo. ঠিক আছে এডাল ধৰা প্লান্ট হল ইয়াতে তোমাৰ কি আছে এন্থ্ৰিডিয়ামটো আছে তাৰপিছত সাৰাউন্ডিংত ধৰা ওয়াটাৰ আছে অৰ ওয়াটাৰ যদিও নাই if suppose there is no water in and around the plant then what will fertilization take place without water no then what will happen they will have to wait for the rainy season pani lagiboi pani nohole fertilization nohobo clear that is a characteristic of a lower plant right so we are talking about this yate ki asile male gamete kita asile yate ki asile pani asile aru yate ki ase egg tu ase so this male gamete comes here water swim biflagellate right antheridium or pra ki ulale mucilage ulai ahile Mucilage ki hol, in the water it mixes up, it secretes certain types of chemicals, they know the pathway to enter. It's almost like a signal that the mucilage gives. This type of attraction because of the chemical properties is called as chemotaxis. So fertilization or kune help korise, chemotaxis help korise, right? Is the point understood? Similarly, in case of angiosperms also, you know about the pollen grains, you know about the male gamete, you know about the egg. The point is, pollen grain to a male gamete, how does it know the location of the female gamete? Kenake gom pai? We know that the pollen grain or the male gamete, not precisely the pollen grain, the male gamete that is present inside the pollen grain needs to fuse with the egg, right? How does the pollen grain or the male gamete inside the pollen grain know the way? Kenake gom pabo kot ase egg to? Hitu botahote ase no? Maximum pollination, most common pollination is air pollination or wind pollination. So pollen grains bilak kot thakibo, windot thakibo. The pollen grains because of wind will fall into the stigma of a plant. In the stigma, what happens? What happens to the pollen grain? This is not in relation with bryophytes. I am talking in terms of angiosperms. That is something that you have studied already. Sexual reproduction in flowering plants is a chapter that we have already completed. Then how come you all don't remember? Correlation is sexual reproduction. That's over, no? So what we know? That we are talking about a stigma like this. Right? Pollen grains will fall here. What will happen to the pollen grain? Inside the pollen grain stick ki thakibo? Duta male gamete thakibo, right? Male gamete kihor logot fuse koribo? Yate jintu egg apparatus ase. Egg apparatus of egg ase, male gamete to fuse koribo. How will the male gamete know that this is the area where the egg is present? What will happen to the pollen tube? What will happen to the pollen grain? The pollen grain absorbs water that is present in the stigma. Without water also it cannot develop. Pani paboi lakibo, right? Water is very important. So once it absorbs water, what happens? The intine comes out. What is intine? The inner membrane of the pollen grain is called as intine. The intine forms what? Pollen tube. Inside the pollen tube, ki thakibo? Male gametes thakibo. It is the pollen grain that enters the stigma or the style, or is it the pollen tube that enters the stigma or the style? Pollen grain to humai jai ne pollen tube dal humai jai? It is no. The pollen grain never enters inside. It is only the pollen tube that will penetrate the stigma and it will come inside. Right? So pollen tube humai ahibo nware. Ki pollen to humai ahibo nware. Pollen is a foreign body. They don't have any importance also. What is important is the male gamete inside it. Right? So the pollen will not enter, the pollen tube will enter. Thik ase humai ahile. Ekhini ki hoy? Style. Remember you have talked about solid style and hollow style also in that chapter. Monot asan nai kobo nware, transmitting tissues asile. Okay, forget. Just refer to those notes, okay? Next, once the pollen tube enters here, no? Ekhini loke humale to nohobo. It has to come to and reach this place, no? So, eitu jega kune dekhabo? Someone that guides the pollen tube. Traffic police thakibo lagibo no, tetehe rasta to dekhabo. So yateo to traffic police eta thakibo lagibo no, tetehe rasta to dekhabo. Who works as a traffic police? There are two words. First, obturator. Second, Filiform Apertures. I think obturator you all have forgotten. Moi jimandur bhabisu. No doubt we have studied in the class, but something this is, I know you all have forgotten. But Filiform Apertures is something that's very commonly asked in exams, right? What is the function of a Filiform Apertures? Guiding the pollen tube. It guides the pollen tube to where? Kole guide kore. Location of the egg. But Filiform Apertures kot thake. There are two conditions. See, if you are guiding this pollen tube, first you have to guide the pollen tube and tell where exactly this ovule is. A gute structure to ovule kot ase, it needs a help, right? And who is going to help? In the ovule, in the funicle, they have a stalk-like structure or they have a flag-like structure that is called as obturator. Obturator will synthesize certain signals and will guide the pollen tube to the ovule. So first guide kune korile, obturator e korile. Obturator কাম কি pollen tube to ovule tule anibo. Inside the ovule, we know the egg apparatus could be here in the micropylar area. The egg apparatus could be in the cella gel area also. So identifying the ovule, kune korile? Obturator. Inside the ovule also, the pollen tube needs to penetrate and have to find where exactly the egg is. হয় নহয় সো ইয়াতে সোমাই গলেইতো নহব এগ কোনটো ইয়াতো তিনটা সেল আছে ইয়াতো তিনটা সেল আছে ইয়াতো দুটা নিউক্লিয়াস আছে এগ কোট আছে কোনোবাইতো গাইড কৰিব লাগিব ন সো দিস ইজ দ্য টাইম when filiform apparatus will help filiform apparatus কোট আছিল এতিয়া what are filiform apparatus certain thread like structures are called as filiform apparatus right filiform apparatus are formed by heard something called as synergid কি আছিল cells obviously it's a cell of which group this group and this group egg apparatus and antipodal cells egg apparatus because we know if suppose this is the egg apparatus consists of how many cells 3 cells out of the 3 cells it's only one cell that is egg remaining eta ki synergid or pra ki hai finger like projections develop kore. These are called as what? Filiform apparatus. So what is the function of the filiform apparatus? Ekhin loke palehi, no? Pollen tube to penetrate koribo. Penetrate kori egg to kot ase will help. Filiform apparatus. So what we notice is when we are talking about fertilization of the male gamete and the female gamete, the male gamete needs to know where exactly the female gamete is. So for that, ki hoy kisaman chemical attraction hoy, and that type of a chemical attraction is called as chemotaxis, which is seen in case of lower plants also. Lower plants boli kole what I am referring is not algae. I am talking about bryophytes onwards because it is only in bryophytes that Archegonia starts developing. Is the point understood? So this is the way the fertilization occurs. I don't think we need to write the note because it's not asked from examination point of view. Keneke fertilize hol, entridium to keneke phati gol, how does the enterozoid swim in the water, right? It is all that you have to know the process, right? What you have learned is the entridium matures, bursts, enterozoids comes out or the male gametes comes out in the water. Similarly, Archegonium also matures, absorbs water, forms mucilage. The mucilage comes and mixes with the water. That gives a signal to the male gamete, attracts the male gamete and puts it inside the structure and fuses with the female gamete. Clear? Is the process clear? Hold Lika. Can I rub? So fertilization in case of bryophytes occur by the process of chemotaxis. Clear? Oh, good. Next. Up till here, is it clear? Right? What is the ploidy of the embryo? Embryo is always twice in. G group pote no hoy, embryo hodai twice in hoy, diploid hoy. Embryo e ki form kore? What does the embryo form? A baby plant, right? If a baby plant has twice in or diploid condition, that baby plant would be called as a sporophyte, ne gametophyte. It would be called as a sporophyte. Clear? So in this case also, the main plant body was a gametophyte. Fertilization occurred, produced a zygote, produced an embryo. Embryo developed another plant. That plant would be called as sporophyte. So we were talking about alternation of generation in case of bryophyte. Duta generation dekha pao. Gametophyte to thake, tahate ki produce kore, sporophyte produce kore, right? So below this embryo ki likhiba. So embryo is no. Right? It's a question to hold. Where is the sporophyte formed on the gametophyte? Or where is the sporophyte formed on the gametophyte would not be the correct one. Where is the sporophyte formed in case of bryophyte? Bryophyte, adult plant body, right? Plant body to male sex organ, female sex organ. N ki form korile? Zygote. Zygote ki form korile? Collection of cells. Collection of cells ok ami ki boli kau? embryo কি form কৰিলে that plant right তাক আমি কি বুলি কৈছো sporophyte ploidy কি twice n কথাটো হল where is the sporophyte formed in case of a bryophyte the answer is on the gametophyte itself বুঝি পাইছানে where is the sporophyte formed on the gametophyte sorry in case of bryophyte the sporophyte in case of bryophyte is formed on the gametophyte itself so a cell too zygote is a single cell zygote will undergo mitosis forms a collection of cells from this collection of cells adult plant develop koribo a plant dalor ploidy kiman twice n he karone a plant dalok ami ki boli koiso sporophyte eta when we are talking about growing of a plant has two conditions either it will grow on the mother plant or it will grow on soil matito hoy obviously plants to matite hoy yate main plant jundal matit hoise tak ami ki koiso gametophyte right gametophyte o uporot ki hoise sporophyte so sporophyte code develop korise clear Now, we'll be talking about how does the sporophyte look like. We know the main plant body was the gametophyte. Gametophyte after fertilization ki produce korile sporophyte. Sporophyte dal dekhat kenekwa. What is the structure, right? So, in case of bryophytes, the sporophyte that is formed has three parts. Right? Jedi chart or form of likha, if you don't study in this form, no, everything will get confused. So for your this one, when you are studying for your test, especially this chapter, Plant Kingdom, no, first study my notes, then study your NCERT. In rest, some of the chapters are moi ki koiso. First study your NCERT, then you study my notes. But there are certain chapters like Plant Kingdom, certain chapter like Plant Anatomy. It's very confusing in the NCERT book. So it's very advisable that you have to read according to the notes, right? Notes out korile, each and every term will be clear. What is the sporophyte? Where is the sporophyte form? Sporophyte or keita part thake, foot ki hoy, foot to ki kam kore. So follow the notes, okay? And my note is also in the form of a chart itself. So it will be easy. Right, so we have talked about if suppose this is the gametophyte or ki form korile, sporophyte is a well-defined sporophyte consists of three parts. Right? Right? Etu ki hoy? Clear? Gametophyte to code grow korise. Eblak ki hoy? Soilot grow korise. So eblak ki hoy? Rhizoids, they don't have roots. Bryophytes or roots ase niki? Nai? So eblak ki hoy? Rhizoids. So gametophyte to code ase. Soilot. Sporophyte to code ase on the gametophyte, right? The sporophyte divided a well-defined sporophyte. Now another thing is whenever we are talking about a sporophyte, it is not like this that in case of all type of bryophytes, you will see a well-defined sporophyte. When I use the word well-defined sporophyte, what exactly I am meaning is a sporophyte consisting of these three specific parts. But sometimes in case of lower bryophytes, the sporophyte might consist of just one part. Gradually he evolve hoise no enekwa to no hoise all of a sudden evolve ho goise so evolution process to jeti ami sam then we will see there are certain examples of bryophytes where the sporophyte is made up of just two parts we'll see a type of a sporophyte where it's made up of just one part. The diagram that I am drawing is in regards with the most advanced type of a bryophyte, that is in case of moss. Right? So, in case of moss, the plant body is a gametophyte. After fertilization, he form koribo sporophyte. Sporophyte keita structure thakibo tinta. A proper tinta code dekha pam, well defined or highly evolved bryophyte. Right? Now, you have to know as far as the functions of these are concerned. Before writing the function, just see. Sporophyte is a product of dash. It is a product of sexual reproduction. Why does a plant undergo sexual reproduction? But why does a plant undergoes reproduction, or why does an organism undergoes reproduction? It wants to increase its number. It has to produce its offsprings. The main body was a gametophyte. This plant needs to produce its offsprings. Offsprings kihere produce koribo, they will produce with the help of spores. Right? Main sexual reproduction or karone offspring produce hoise niki directly yate. Sexual reproduction hole na N into N, that is zygote, zygote from the embryo, embryo from the baby plant. Is this baby plant could be considered the offspring of this plant? Are you understanding the point? Bryophyte or sexual reproduction hoise nai? Hoise? We have seen the formation of the gametes. Duita fuse kori ki form korile? Zygote. Zygote ki form korile? Adal notun plant. Hey, notun plant dalo kami ki boli koiso? Sporophyte. If it produces a new plant, does that mean the new plant is the offspring of the mother plant? Offspring boli ketia kom when exactly supposed to eke hobo, the ploidy would be the same. Right? So, if the ploidy differs, then obviously these would be considered as two different plants. So, yate main ploidy ru ki asile? N. A gute dal ki hoy? Twice N. So, a plant dalor ekhinik baby boli kobo parim niki? Noari. So, sexual reproduction or karone tahate offspring produce korise niki? Understood? So, we are concerned about the process now. We have to talk about reproduction. So, now we understood this was a part of sexual reproduction. In this sporophyte, we have a structure called as capsule. Inside the capsule, we have certain cells. These cells will produce what? Spores. Right? A spores bilak junto capsule form korise. Once the capsule bursts, the spores will get dispersed, the spores will fall to the soil, and ultimately in the soil, spores will ki form koribo? Baby plant, and this baby plant would be called as ki. Just see whether you understood or not. Take your time and understood. Here question ki hai, what is the ploidy of a spore? Spores are always haploid. Right? So, spore ki hol? Haploid. A gute structure da ki asile? Diploid asile. So, diploid or a capsule or original cells bila ki asile? Diploid. These cells underwent which one? Meiosis. Produces what? Haploid. These spores got dispersed, fall on the ground, produce a new plant. That new plant is a gametophyte, which is the original plant body. A tukhe ami yar offspring boli kobo parim. A part took yar offspring fully kobo noaru. Kyo kobo noaru? Because the ploidy itself is different. Is it clear? It is wa. Kiba doubts ase niki? First make everything clear, then we'll write the notes. So, out of this structure, if you are talking about this tree structure, na, which one is the most important part? Capsule. Why? Because spores are spores a key form of a baby plant. Now, if in this plant, this structure is most important, it has to grow also. Grow to koriboi lagibo. First day itself to eneke develop kora nai, no? Lahe lahe develop korise. So, if it has to grow, it requires food. Main plant edal, male plant upor edal plant develop korise. A plant dal grow koribo lagile food lagibo na lage. Food lagibo. So, from where will it get the food? Because we know of this entire structure, the most important part is this one. Yar bhitorte ki ase? Spores ase. But cells bilak ase, cells will form the source. This cells needs to develop, so this cells needs food. The point is food to corpora lobo. If it grew on the soil, they could have taken the food from there. Nize nize bonale hoy kabar pra lole heten. But now we know that this is totally dependent on this one. So ultimately they will take the food from where? From the gametophyte itself. So we have these structures, no? So what is the function of a food? Its attachment. What is the function of the seta? Transport. Food, water, everything dependent on the gametophyte, and ultimately this portion will grow. Since this portion takes the food, the water, everything from the gametophyte, so we use a word that is called as totally dependent on the gametophyte. Sporophyte or gametophyte দুটা যদি generation থাকে, either they would be dependent on the gametophyte or they will not be dependent, right? Partially dependent to hobo pare, totally dependent to hobo pare. In this case, if I say this sporophyte takes in both water and food from the gametophyte, so we will be using a word called as totally dependent or completely dependent on the gametophyte. Jedi nijor khwa bostu nije bonai, only it takes the water, partially dependent on the gametophyte, right? In case of higher bryophytes, especially in case of moss, what we see is in the sporophyte কিছুমান leaf-like structure দেখা পাম. Whenever it has leaf-like structure, so obviously it will be green, it will produce its own food. So if it produces its own food, they are not dependent on the gametophyte for food, but they are dependent on the gametophyte for water. Because they don't have roots, no? পানি কোপৰা লব gametophyte পৰা লব নিজৰ খোৱা বস্তু নিজে বনাইছে ঠিক আছে so if food and water both the things are absorbed from the gametophyte we use the word completely dependent if it is only water for which they are dependent on the gametophyte we use the word partially dependent so there are certain examples of bryophytes which are partially dependent on the gametophyte or completely dependent on the gametophyte. Is the point understood? Ako, when you are making a comparison with pteridophytes, again these two words we are going to study, sporophyte, gametophyte, sporophyte. In case of pteridophytes also, we will see two plants, a sporophyte and a gametophyte. In case of bryophytes also, we see two plants, a sporophyte and a gametophyte. Question 2 kiya hai? Dependent and independent. In case of bryophytes, the main plant body is a gametophyte. Sporophyte is dependent on the gametophyte. Dependent boli kole totally hobo pare, partially hobo pare, kintu we know it's dependent. But in case of pteridophyte, the plant body is a sporophyte. It produces gametophyte, but the gametophyte is totally independent. Pteridophytes, now you don't have to think, just a way to say. Because the pteridophytes are to gametophyte, sporophyte pump, relation to ki independent. Duita plant body independent. Duita plant body soilot belek belek ke hoy. কিন্তু ইয়াতে এডাল প্ল্যান্ট বডি আনটো প্ল্যান্ট বডিৰ ওপৰত হয় সেইকাৰণে আমি তাক কি বুলি কৈছো ডিপেন্ডেন্ট ডিপেন্ডেন্ট কুড বি অফ টু টাইপস কমপ্লিটলি পাৰ্শিয়ালি ক্লিয়াৰ এইটো ডায়াগ্ৰাম সাইড ৰাখি লৈছা ন so we'll write certain informations about food seta and capsule okay now just tell me the ploidy of the foot foot or ploidy kiman twice n n n ne twice n kenege main plant dale dohon twice n tar part to ki hobo twice n hobo hoy na what is the ploidy of the seta twice n so sporophyte pora jiman bor parts ulai sob twice n hobo capsule or ploidy kiman twice n kintu capsule or bitor spores or ploidy kiman so capsule prothome cells asile cells bilake meiosis undergo kori pelahe spores form korise so the parts are twice n so ploidy wise question ahibo kintu so you have to be specific clear no some informations about the food okay suppose, just look into the two diagrams that I have drawn. I have drawn the diagram just to explain the function of seta. Seta ki koribo, no doubt transport koriboi, right? Eto to automatically jodi e absorb kore eto transport hoboi leibo. But apart from that, the main function is not transport. Main function to kiba beleg. Beleg to buzar agot, let's compare these two diagrams. This is a gametophyte, this is also a gametophyte. This part is the sporophyte, this part is also the sporophyte. What is the difference that you can see? In this case, seta to short. In this case, seta to dighol. Advantage, disadvantage kiba eta hobo tar karone. The height will depend, or it will do something. If the seta is short, তেতিয়াহলে কি হবো আর সেটাটো যদি দীঘল হয় তেতিয়াহলে কি হবো don't tell me that it will transport less and it will transport more, no. Something related with the spores. Spores ক'ত আছে capsule-টোৰ ভিতৰত capsule-টো যেতিয়া burst কৰিব spores বিলাক dispersed হ'ব নহয় if the seta is short spores বিলাক ক'ত dispersed হ'ব in and around if the seta is long spores বিলাক ক'ত dispersed হ'ব this is a cut, right? So what is the main function of the seta? To give a proper height to the capsule so that the spores are dispersed to further areas, because each and every living organism wants to increase its habitat area. Bangladeshi concept eta ase no amar basically lage. So even the plants they want to increase their habitat, no, they don't want to remain confined to a certain place. So basically jegat keneke spread koribo jeta spores bilakok theli dibo no. So same concept. So it will come ki giving a proper height to the capsule. What will happen if it gets a height? The spores will disperse to further areas, right? As I said, the sporophyte might not always have all the three parts, right? Some lower bryophytes will not show the presence of three parts in a sporophyte, right? Kintu in case of a well developed or the most advanced bryophyte, that is a moss. Moss could be of different types. Funaria is a moss. Sphagnum is a moss. Moss buli kole okol adult plant e nohoy. Beleg species ase no, right? So Funaria is an example of a moss which is considered as one example of a highest bryophyte. So highest bryophyte or ki thakibo all the structures of a sporophyte. But if you are talking about Rixia, Rixia is an example of a lower bryophyte. In this case, the sporophyte is not well defined but well formed nohoy. Tat ki na thake, seta na thake. So it will just have the foot, and on the foot, suppose this is the Rixia, tate foot to thakibo, foot to upore ki thakibo, capsule to thakibo. So as a result, tahate ki hobo, ekhin usorte thakibo. Jedi usorte develop hoy. Okay, now listen to me. So I am talking about moss. Mossot ki ase, it has the capsule. Spores bilak ki hoise, dispersed hoise, right? In case of Rixia, it does not have a seta, it has a capsule. The spores will get dispersed and all the baby plants will be confined to this area. What happened last bench? What is that makes you laugh so much? Please share the joke. So be ha ko man boring lesson eta kori ase kwa. See? Kya hua? Okay, chalo. Something private jokes that cannot be shared. Okay. Oh, were you talking about bryophytes only? Talking about bryophytes? Okay, chalo, aajo, class mein. Okay. Rixia doesn't have a seta, it has a capsule, so these plants will be confined to a particular area in a small habitat, and these will be spread to a different or wider area. Spreading to a wider area gives an evolution factor to a plant. That plant could be considered as advanced. Rexiac primitive koise, yak advanced koise. Advanced hoar aru eta condition ki, jodi bahut jagat grow kore, advanced character. Kom jagat grow kore, primitive character. Did you understand the asmus? Kya samjha? And rest of the students, they understood? By this time, you understand asmus, because from the first class itself I am speaking in asmus. So by this time, but these two are new, na? Understood or did not? Okay, rest of the class understood, na? Okay, please say understood or you did not understand. If you did not understand, I am ready to explain again. If you understood, that's okay. Understood? Very good. So once you attend my class, it's not only botany that you'll learn asmus also, right? Okay. So this is done. This is done. We'll write something about the capsule. Akko important points ahi gol no digdari akko tik korillo homosporus. Again the question is asked. Spores, something that is present in bryophytes, also present in pteridophytes. Bryophytes or spores kenekwa, pteridophytes or spores kenekwa. We have to read two words. One is homosporus, the other is heterosporus. Heterosporus condition is seen in, homosporus condition is seen in, right? So these are the points that you will compare in study. Okay, coming to this, no, capsule. What is the ploidy of the capsule? Twice in. What is the ploidy of the sporogenous tissues? Because what is sporogenous tissues? Capsular bitor jimanpur cells, a cells bilakok ami ki boli koisu? Sporogenous tissues. So ploidy kiman hobo? Twice in itself, right? This sporogenous tissues would ultimately converting itself into spore mother cells. What is the ploidy of the spore mother cells? Clear? Spore mother cells will undergo meiosis. Because of one meiosis, how many offsprings are produced? 4. What is the ploidy? N. That is the reason why I have written 4 haploid spores. Right? So, eta spore mother cell undergoes meiosis to produce 4 offsprings, and they are all haploid, because we know meiosis is a reduction division. Right? Next, if the new spores that are formed, all the spores are exactly same, morphologically similar, nothing is big or small, then we use a word called as homosporus. In case of bryophytes, the spores that are produced are all of the same shape and size. The term that we use for such a condition is called as homosporus. But in case of pteridophytes onwards, we will be using something called as heterosporus. Heterosporus, as the name suggests, what we understand, they will have 2 different sizes. One might be small, the other might be big. In the bryophytes, key condition dekha pao? Homosporus condition dekha pao. This is one important point. Clear? Okay. So, ekhin loke ki doubts ase swa? I think you have written it down, no? Okay. Just to just put it in a nutshell about what we have studied. Bryophytes, the main plant body is a gametophyte. The gametophyte would produce the sporophyte. Sporophyte will produce spores. Spores will fall to the soil. Ploidy of the spores, and on the soil, spores will produce baby plant. Baby plant is called as the gametophyte. What is the ploidy of the gametophyte? N. Again, look at super clear. Now the question is, which cell or dash is considered as the first cell of gametophytic generation? Dash is considered as the first cell of gametophytic generation. A spore is considered as the first cell of gametophytic generation. Hetu upor hoday question ahe, right? Dash is the first cell of gametophyte. This is the point that we are going to write now. So some information about the spores. Jeneke ami koise embryo hodai twice n, spores hodai n, right? Clear? Any doubts? Spores kot thake inside the capsule. Spores ketia liberate hobo only when the capsule dehisces, right? If the capsule bursts, only then the spores will come out. When will the capsule dehisce? It will dehisce during the dry season. So when will the spores come out? The spores will come out during the dry season. But does that mean they will germinate immediately? No. They will have to wait for the water, they will have to wait for the rainy season, then only they will germinate. So they will get dispersed in dry season, but they will germinate only during the rainy season. Clear? And this is something that we understand now. Alternation of generation is seen in case of bryophytes. So up till now, we know main plant body is, yeah. No, they have longevity. Right? They have that tiding over unfavorable condition. They have. Out of all the spores that are dispersed, each and every spore will obviously not germinate. बहुत सारे तो वो हो जाएंगे. They will get damaged. Right? That is the reason why in case of lower plants, the production needs to be tremendous. Right? Spores should always be produced in huge numbers. Similar is the explanation in case of pollen grains also, because when the pollen grains move from one place to another, not necessarily each and every pollen grain will reach that specific plant. On the way also, it might become dispersed, it might get damaged, right? So, iske liye what they have to do is they have to produce it in many huge numbers. right? So obviously some of the spores will get damaged. So up till here I think it's time. So what we have done is we have talked about the word called as gametophyte. Gametophyte develops the sporophyte. Inside the sporophyte you will see the spores. The spores germinates on dash on the gametophyte and on the soil. Question to hold? Yes. Question to hold? The plant body was a gametophyte. Gametophyte develops a sporophyte. Sporophyte develops spores. Spores gets dispersed. Spores germinates on the gametophyte and on the soil. On the soil. In the next class, what we will see is, so spores bilake jetia soilot jai noy, ki koribo lage? They have to produce the new plant. But we will see that in all the cases of bryophyte, direct germination does not take place. Directly spore eta matit pori pela etal baby plant form korile. No, not so simple. In case of certain types of higher bryophytes, we have something called as indirect germination. Lower bryophytes or spore to jeta soilot pore loge loge gametophyte form kore. Higher bryophytes, especially in case of moss, spore to ki koribo matit porar loge loge baby plant form nokore. They will form an intermediate structure, that is what is called as Protonema of Moss. I think you have heard this word, right? Protonema of Moss, this is a word that you have heard during types of asexual reproduction in living world also, right? Binary fission example, asexual reproduction example, you have come across a word called as Protonema of Moss. So what is Protonema? A protonema is an intermediate structure formed by the spore on the soil. It is that protonema that will form buds. The buds will develop new plants. So it's a very complicated structure, something that we are going to discuss in the next class. Okay? I think that's all for today. Thank you.